Welcome back, everyone. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing string functions and operations. Luckily, PostgreSQL provides us with a variety of string functions and operators that allow us to do things like edit, combine, and alter text data columns. Let's jump to the documentation as well as pgadmin to see what's available to us and also work through some typical examples. Alright, here I am inside my browser. I have pgadmin open, but before we explore it, I want to just show you the documentation page for string functions and operators. So if you go to this page in the documentation, it's postgresql.org/doc/current/functions-string, or you just look up string functions and operators plus PostgreSQL. You'll notice that very similar to the mathematical functions page, it gives you a list of functions, the return data type, descriptions, examples, and then results. So you can take a look at the different types of functions you can do, things like string concatenation, so you can concatenate two strings together in order to get some sort of result. You can also do things like check the length of strings, lowercase strings, etc. So lots of different things, searching for substrings within a certain pattern, as well as pattern and regular expression matching. You can check out section 9.7 in the documentation for more details on that, in case regular expressions and pattern matching is something you're already quite familiar with. Recall that we also have like and ILike as operators that can be used with things like wildcards. There's other string functions as well, things like converting from a string to some sort of encoding depending on what language you're using, etc. So lots and lots of different options here. We definitely don't have time, nor do we need to really go through all of these, since a lot of them you won't really experience yourself in a typical query, but we will go over some really common use cases, especially with this string concatenation. Often you want to assemble some sort of string or text data based off other columns. So let's jump to pgadmin 4 here and explore just a few typical examples. We're going to be dealing with the customer table, so I want to quickly show you what's in the customer table in case you have forgotten. So let's run this. We can see we have customer ID, store ID, and what we're going to be working with here is the first name and last name. So notice that these customers already have an email. Later on, we're going to be showing you how to possibly construct an example email through a SQL query in case you had to do that. But first, let's show you how you can perform a very simple function call that operates on text data. For example, let's say we wanted to grab the length of the first name of somebody. To do that, we would simply look up in the documentation how you would actually grab the length. And if you start searching here for things like length, eventually you would find by scrolling down and kind of exploring this that there's actually a length function. So you just follow the example here. Here all the examples are shown with actual strings, but you can just pass in a text data column instead. So we'll say select, and you can put this in all caps if you want just for formatting purposes. Select length from first name or from customer here. We run this and now we have the length of that first name. So maybe you wanted to use that as some sort of identifier. Okay, now let's show you how to perform concatenation. In fact, if you go to the documentation, it's one of the very first things they talk about, string concatenation. And what they do is they use these two pipe operators in a row, usually on your keyboard that's right above the backslash. So let's go ahead and concatenate first name along with last name. So if we say first name space two pipe operators and then last name from customer, we run that. A couple things to note here is there is no space currently between the first name and the last name in the results. Also, this column doesn't have a name. Let's go ahead and fix these. Let's start off with fixing the fact that there is no space there. So we just told PostgreSQL to take the first name and immediately concatenate it with the last name. If we want, we can add in another concatenation of just a space string. So note what I'm doing here. I'm saying first name concatenated with this empty space. So notice there is a space here in between these two single quotes, and then concatenate that again with the last name. So now when I run this, I get the spacing between the first name and the last name. And you could replace this with whatever you want. So if you wanted to put two dashes there, notice now there's two dashes there. So we'll keep it as just a space. And then the other thing we wanted to fix here was the fact that we just have this kind of weird question mark, column, question mark. So we can use the alias to work with this. We'll say select first name, last name as, and let's just go ahead and type this as full name. We run this, and now we see we've been able to change that data output to be full name. So a very typical query here for using string concatenation. You can always put in other functions as well onto these columns and concatenate at the same time. For instance, we could uppercase these by using upper and pass those columns into this. So we can say upper here as well. And now when we run this, notice that the full name is now in full uppercase. You can always expand this column width to see the full results. And now let's show you one last kind of more complex example. To reiterate, I'm going to select everything from the customer table. Let's imagine that for some reason we didn't already have an email for these customers, or maybe even for some employees, and we wanted to create an email for them. Well, often, if you work at a company, you may realize this, but there's an email method where you just take the first letter of the first name and then add in their last name, and then add in something like at whatever your company name.com is. Let's see if we can follow that simple process using SQL. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this in a couple of steps. First, we know we need to concatenate the first name or first letter of the first name, then the last name, and then let's just use @gmail.com for our example purposes. So I'm going to do the following. We'll say first name concatenated with last name concatenated with, and then as a string, we'll just say @gmail.com. So we run this, and so far we have a couple of things here. No, I said we want just to use the first letter of the first name, and also something that maybe isn't exactly a problem, but we do want to fix this in our examples here for practice, is the fact that we have both the first name and last name still capitalized. So let's go ahead and fix the issue first of, instead of grabbing the whole first name, I just want to grab the first letter. Now, if you're exploring the documentation or you do a quick Google search on this, you would eventually figure out that there is a function called left, which returns the first n characters in the string. And to give you an example here, if you call left on A, B, C, D, E, and then 2 as a second parameter, it returns back A, B, which are the first 2 letters, which means we can use left on the first name column along with a 1 to grab that first letter. So let's go ahead and run that. We'll say left on first name, comma 1, in order just to grab that first letter. So now we have J, M, P, etc., Ellie, Smith, Johnson. So we're able to grab just that first letter. And now let's go ahead and lowercase everything. We'll call lower on these results. So we'll do lower on last name as well. Run this, and we have the expected email addresses. And if we want, we can always say something as our custom email that we created. Run that, and this is a very typical example of using string functions and string operators in order to basically create a new column that is useful for a certain situation, such as creating customer email addresses. Okay, so definitely a big part of this is exploring the documentation and feeling comfortable with it. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.